Now today's video is going to be about the brand new Sirui Nightwalker series. I don't know why I said Nightwalkers with an accent. However, we are going to be talking about this set of cinema lenses, the 24, the 35, and the 55mm. Now, Sirui made these lenses incredibly sharp and have great color, but I am going to go out on a limb and say if you're someone on the Sony FX30 or a Super 35 sensor, this actually might be a savior for you. We'll get there. Now you are going to have to account for the crop factor between these three lenses because you will be looking at more like a 36, a 52.5, and an 82.5 focal length. However, all three lenses in this set are the same weight and they're also the same focus throw, which is going to be great if you hook it up onto motors or you have somebody that's actually pulling focus for you. Now, I did say these are going to be a savior for the Sony FX30, but it does work in a variety of Super 35 APS-C sensors. You're still going to get the RF mount for the Red Komodo or other Canon cameras, the X mount for Fuji, and the Micro Four Thirds if you're someone that uses Blackmagic. Now for me personally, I am a really big fan of using filtrations or using the anamorphic adapter on my lenses, and all three of these lenses across the board have a 67mm filter thread. All of those things are going to be nice. However, the one thing that I do really enjoy about these lenses is a t1.2 aperture. The reason why it gives it the Nightwalker name is most of the time a lot of people complain about Super 35 sensors not being great in low light, which means that if you keep everything else the same, you're going to have to increase your aperture by quite a bit. And at t1.2, that actually lets in a lot of light and it also creates a lot of background separation, which means that you can use a set of these lenses in order for you to work in better low light situations. Now, for what it's worth, there is going to be one difference between these three lenses, and that's going to be its minimum focusing distance. Now, the 24 is going to be 0.3 meters, the 35 is going to be 0.4, and the 55 is 0.6. Now, personally for me, if I'm going to be farther back anyways, getting something at 0.6 meters at 55mm focal length is plenty for a close-up, so it doesn't bother me too much, but just be aware that that's a thing that might be on these lenses. Now, first impressions, overall, these lenses actually look amazing for its price point. Now, you do let in a lot of light at t1.2, however, for me, manual focusing, especially when it's daylight, I kind of like sticking around t2, just so I have enough depth of field that I could actually nail my focus whenever I need to. Now, with the sharpness and the color representation being as good as it is, it's not necessarily the perfect lens. Now, with cheaper lenses, you will actually have something called chromatic aberration, where you might notice some green or some purple fringing, especially when things go from really, really light to really, really dark. And that's actually no different on these sets of lenses. Now, I did test out each individual lens to see where that actually happens. Now, I'm going to try my best not to make this video incredibly long, but at t1.2, you are going to notice a lot of chromatic aberration. However, when you go up to t2.8 or even t4, it starts to clear up quite a bit. Now, to save a whole bunch of money, that might be something that you live with, and sometimes you might not even notice. However, it is going to be there. Alright, so we're at the gym here, and we're actually going to answer the question if Super 35 or APS-C lenses work on full-frame cameras like the Sony FX6. Now, if you actually use a clear image zoom feature that's going to be on your Sony FX6 or any other camera that does, you only really have to zoom into about 1.3 times in order to get rid of some of the vignetting that you're going to see. Now, if you do decide to use Super 35 lenses on full-frame cameras, you might see some dark edges around your frame, but if you do just zoom in a little bit, you'll actually be able to get rid of that. But let's actually just see how the footage looks on a full-frame camera. Alright, so just for fun and talking about full frame cameras, I'm actually going to use the Ronin 4D. You could actually put an E-mount adapter on the front of this guy, so I'm going to try the Super 35 Nightwalkers on this one, and it's actually going to work as well as I think it's going to, except you're going to get some pretty heavy vignetting because you don't have the clear image zoom. However, I'm just going to zoom in about 1.3, 1.4 times, and it actually works pretty well. Now, what's cool is it does have the LiDAR on here as well. A lot of people are kind of nervous about manual focus, so having the LiDAR on here that actually does the autofocus for you on the Ronin 4D works pretty well. So if you do have this camera and you don't mind cropping in post, you can do it. It does work, but you know, you have to do some workarounds. Now, speaking of getting used to manual focus, you're probably used to using autofocus photography lenses as well. However, the Sirui Nightwalkers are actually going to be a lot less expensive than some of the other counterparts, even the full frame and the APS-C versions. Now, what I decided to do is I'm going to compare these to some other photography lenses as well. So I do have the 24mm Sony lens, the 50mm Sony lens, and the 35 as well, and we're going to see a side-by-side comparison. Shut up! And we're gonna see a side-by-side comparison to see if the image between a photography lens that's gonna be a little bit more expensive that you might be used to actually can compare pretty well to something that's a much cheaper Nightwalker series lens. Now we're gonna start with the 24mm Nightwalker lens, and it actually leans a little bit warmer than what I would expect. Now, G Master lenses across the board are very, very neutral and even a little bit more on the cool side. But when you put these guys side by side together, in terms of the image quality, the sharpness, and the little pieces of contrast that you'll see between the two, there's not a gigantic difference, to be completely honest with you. Now, the G Master is going to have other features in the lens itself, but in terms of optical quality, even on the 35 side of things, you're still gonna get a little bit more warmth on the Sirui 35mm. However, compared to the G Master, which is more neutral, that detail and that sharpness is still really close together. Now, with the 55 compared to the 50, they're obviously going to be slightly different focal lengths at 5mm of a difference, so you might see a bit of a difference in the shot. But across the board, I'm pretty much saying the same thing for every single lens, but that the optical quality actually looks really good on the Sirui Nightwalker lenses. The highlight roll-off is great, the color looks really great. You might want to do a couple adjustments if you actually want to match them to a G Master lens, but from a sharpness and an image standpoint, they're actually pretty close. Now, the Sirui Nightwalkers are meant to be shot in darker situations at t1.2. So it kind of made sense that at some point in this review, I actually shot shots at night of this guy dancing.
Hey, how's it going?
But yeah, no, we're gonna actually put on the 24mm lens, we're gonna flip it up to 1.2-ish, and we're gonna see what shots we get. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned throughout this video is actually the price of these lenses. And if you want to pick up one of the Sirui Nightwalkers, they're only going to cost you about $310 if you go in the Indiegogo campaign and pick up the early bird pricing. Now, if you want to get the metallic ones just like I did, it actually is going to cost you about $40 more at $349, which means the black ones are actually cheaper. Sirui, what's up with that? Anyways, I'm just kidding. Now, these lenses are a great bang for your buck, and if you want to pick up the set, you could actually get either color for less than $1,000. However, there are a couple of cons with these lenses, which also I think just comes with having cheaper lenses to begin with. Now, for one, you're actually not going to get an autofocus lens, which should come as a little bit more obvious because we've been talking about cine lenses and most of them don't have autofocus. That might be a little bit scary to some people because I can see a lot of beginners picking this guy up. However, with a longer focus throw, it actually makes it a little bit harder for you to throw off your focus in comparison to something like a photography lens. Now, also speaking about the manual focus as well, I did find that the actual dampening on the ring isn't necessarily consistent throughout the set. Now, it does have a smooth manual focus, however, it feels a little bit too smooth. In some cases, it actually might be a little bit easier to actually throw things off a bit because there isn't as much resistance when you're turning your manual focusing ring. Now, you are going to get a pretty wide rotation, so there is some saving grace there, but I wish there was a little bit more dampening in the manual focus rings throughout the lenses, or at least it was consistent throughout each lens. Now, Sirui did do a good job of actually matching the look and the weight and the throw of these lenses from a body standpoint. However, optically, it's not a completely matching set. And the reason why a lot of people buy sets of lenses is to make sure that they're color matched so your image looks the same, and the only variable that's going to change is going to be maybe slight differences in aperture and your focal length. Now, also, I want to point out that this is just a sample copy that I have, so they might actually change it in the production version. However, the 24mm doesn't seem to match up with the 35 and the 55, being a much warmer lens. However, like we mentioned before, we could always just kind of color grade that backwards and start to save ourselves a little bit if things get out of control. And the last con that might be a deal breaker for some users is going to be the chromatic aberration while shooting wide open. Now, that's something that I'm actually willing to live with if I'm going to be saving up to $1,000 less per lens on a cine lens side of things. If there's going to be a little bit of chromatic aberration, I just have to stop up in order to get rid of that. And in some situations, even when you're shooting at T1.2, you might not notice, and some people actually might not care. That being said, do I recommend the Sirui Nightwalker series for a Super 35 camera like the Sony FX30? And like I said at the beginning of this video, I think this set of lenses is a savior for people that are using Super 35. A lot of people that are using crop sensor cameras nowadays, anywhere between the Sony FX30 or other Super 35 cameras that are available, a lot of times are going to be on the beginning side of things. Or if that, they probably bought it because they wanted to save a little bit of money on the lenses that you might have to pair it with your camera. And at $300 per lens and under $1,000 for a set, and the ability to have great image quality, great aperture ranges, and honestly be a really good and well-built cinema lens, I think these are pretty much a shoe-in and a steal for a lot of people that are starting out or people that want to save a couple dollars. Now, if you do want to go pick these guys up or look at more information, there is going to be a link down in the description down below. However, this is probably the 9th or 10th video you've seen about these lenses, so there is going to be a lot of information that I might have missed, and I might have covered something that somebody else didn't. That being said, I hope you enjoyed the video, or at the very least you learned something, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.